Well, hi, everyone. Welcome to the Asian Mental Health Collective Career panel. We have some really amazing guests on today's panel. So why don't we quickly go around, if everybody can introduce themselves, their acculturation, and finally an icebreaker question: what if they were an ice cream flavor, what flavor would you be? I can quickly go first. My name is Lucia Liu. I'm the host of Rock the Boat podcast. It's a podcast about Asian Americans who are challenging the status quo. I am a 1.5 generation. I came to the States when I was 3, and then afterwards, I actually went back to China for high school. So it's complicated. And if I were an ice cream flavor, I would be mint chocolate chip because I'm a little spicy. And that's it. Gabe, you want to go?
Sure. Hi. Hi, everyone. My name is Gabe. I use he, him, his pronouns. I'm a clinical psychology doctoral candidate from Palo Alto University. I'm a Filipino American as well. I'm a second generation. My mom was born here. My dad immigrated from the Philippines, and I grew up here. Trying to think of just general community background. I'm from Palo Alto University and involved in a lot of different psychological associations, the Asian American Psychological Association and the Division of Filipinx American Psychologists. I'm so sorry for the icebreaker question, everyone, too. Before we started, I was talking about just interview questions. I've gotten weird interview questions. And so this is where we're at. If I were ice cream flavor, I would probably be chocolate chip cookie dough because vanilla, because everyone knows vanilla. It's really nice. It's easy. Everyone likes it. And then the cookie dough is just like a little bit of something you're not expecting. So that's what ice cream flavor I would be.
Sorry, I was saying, David, you're on mute. You're next, but I was on mute. So there you go.
Awesome. What's going on? I'm David Kim, and you probably know about 15 other David Kims. So I'll just explain my version of David Kim. I'm Korean American, 1.5, came to New York City when I was 10 years old, but it was too cold. So moved to Silicon Valley, California, after totaling 3 cars in the winter storms. And so loving it here. I'm a pastor in Silicon Valley, and I'm also a Enneagram coach, if you're familiar with Enneagram. And I just recently wrote a kids book about change, just journeying a little bit of my process of what change was as an immigrant here to the States, and wrote it for kids and families alike. And so glad to be here. And the ice cream flavor, honey lavender is what I'm going to go. I love laundry detergent, smell and taste of all that. Sounds a little bit weird, creepy, but that's what it is for now. All right.
Awesome. Thank you so much, David. Emily?
Hi, my name is Emily Hu. I am first generation American, second generation Taiwanese. Like many people, I work in tech in Silicon Valley. But when I'm not working in tech at night, I'm a professional power lifter. My claim to fame was I broke 3 all-time world records in the lightweight women's division. And then I became the first Asian American female to be on The Rock's Titan Games on NBC. I am the Asian female on all the promotional material for season 1, including the giant billboards. So you can see my 6-pack there. Favorite, what ice cream am I? Everyone took all the good ones. So I will say I'm Rocky Road because I'm very sweet, but I'm also nuts.
Love it. Love Rocky Road. Thank you, Emily. Wes?
Hi, I'm Wesley Chan. I'm Chinese American. My parents were born in China. I was born here. And I'm going to be that person that is going to ask, that makes me first generation. Is that right?
Second.
Second.
I think that's second generation.
If I'm the first one born in America.
Yeah, because they were first gen, and then you were born in America, so you're second gen.
Oh wow!
So you leveled up.
Well, I mean, I've been wondering that for a long time, and I hope a lot of the audience is too, because I was asking that question for them, really. Yeah. No, I make stuff, writer, director, co-founder of Wong Fu Productions. We have a YouTube channel that's like one of the oldest since YouTube was created. but I'm really honored to be speaking with everyone here. Yeah, we'll get into the stories later. But if I were a ice cream, it's not my favorite, but if I was one, I'd be just a spherical ball of ice. It would be the most pure form. It wouldn't have much flavor, but it'd be the feeling of coldness, and the taste would change according to whoever is tasting it.
So you'd be like shaved ice.
No, not shaved, just a block,
No, just a block of ice.
A sphere, a perfect sphere, like, yeah. But I like vanilla.
Awesome. Well, for someone who's very familiar with ice, who's going next, Apollo, you want to introduce yourself?
Yeah, thanks. My name is Apollo Ono. I guess my previous life was I was an Olympic athlete. My father's Japanese. He was born in Japan, came to here when he was 17 years old. I was born here. And my career has been kind of sparse between the first half of my life was really based in the Olympic movement and competing in my respective Olympic sport, and then retirement, and from Olympic sport into a wide variety of different entrepreneurship activities, and kind of a newly rededicated focus on kind of mindset and performance and reinvention, etc. The ice cream that I would probably be that's tough, right? That's like asking someone what they want to eat at night. If I was any ice cream, I don't know, like one that is like all of different types of flavors. So like, I guess anything that you can put inside like popping su or like a halo halo, although I think they traditionally use like ube, right? Like, right, Gabriel? I don't know. That's very hard asking, I think, each one of us. But Wesley had the most creative answers. Spherical ball, Prometheus from the, like, that was pretty aggressive. I like that.
I agree. So, I mean, this is a career panel. Thank you guys for giving a brief background around your careers. There's so much, obviously, more to what you have all just described. So I kind of want to go way back to when you guys were kids and like growing up with immigrant parents. Was there anything particular that you wanted to be while you were kids? And then did your parents want you to be something else? Emily, you want to kick that off?
Sure. So I grew up, I loved comic books and I love superheroes. So I think like at one point I wanted to be I think I wanted to be like a ninja. And then I also like wanted to be a teacher. And my mom said, no, you can't be a teacher because you'll be poor. And then my parents said, you get two choices. No, they said, you get one choice, you're going to be a doctor. And then as I got older, they added a second choice. They said, you're going to be a doctor or an engineer. And that's that.
And you ended up being an engineer.
I ended up being an engineer because I liked comics so much. I thought, well, this is probably the better choice.
Anybody else where they ended up being what their parents wanted them to be, or fought their parents about being what they wanted to be? David?
Yeah, I have a unique background. My parents didn't want me to be a doctor or a lawyer, so that was pretty sweet for me. But they wanted me to be a pastor, and so I'm in a religious family, Christian family, and so I just followed that journey all throughout, just trying to, and I can share more down the road. Particularly, just trying to please my parents, right? Even in the religious sphere, I became a pastor just to make them happy, and then had to find my own place and footing throughout that journey. So yeah.
Mm. Yeah. I think a lot of folks sort of can go along with what their parents want. I know that some of you guys didn't go along with what your parents wanted, or your parents didn't really have a lot of pressure, put a lot of pressure on you guys. Gabe, do you want to?
Yeah. A little bit of kind of what I explained a little bit in my bio. So I'm pursuing a field in psychology, and I think kind of related to David, both my parents were doctors, but actually they didn't want me to be a doctor at all. I distinctly remember actually as a kid, my dad coming home from like a late night shift saying, don't be a doctor. Definitely do not be a doctor. It's too much. It's too stressful. And so that I kind of had a lot of freedom to explore a little bit about the careers I wanted to take. And that really didn't go anywhere until like I was age 17, where I think a little bit more about me that's important to share is, my family has lived experience of mental illness, and specifically bipolar disorder. My dad was diagnosed when I was 17. And that drove me into psychology because I really wanted to know, what is psychology, what is mental illness, but even beyond that, like how is mental illness developed? Specifically, how did my dad develop mental illness? And so I kind of followed that vein. And actually, my family really supported it because they knew that's kind of where I was coming from. But at least my experience in this career has been kind of weird because I have this support, but at the same time, I find myself a little bit isolated in terms of I don't know how to talk about mental illness, about psychology, mental health to my family, because it's just such a stigmatized topic that, I didn't even know what mental illness was until I was 17 beyond.
Mhm.
That's been a huge
Mhm.
part about my narrative and career of what's unspoken and what is unsaid. Because it's heavy. It can be really heavy.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's to your point, it's not a topic that a lot of like the older Asian generation likes to talk about, and it's like not something that I think they've learned how to talk about as well. Apollo, do you want to talk a bit about growing up and training and speed skating?
Sure. So I grew up in the Seattle area. I was raised in a single parent household, and my dad, I think he had all love and the best of intentions for me as I was growing up, but he also had really high aspirations. I know that everyone on this call probably can relate to that, as having, Asian parents who obviously express their love in many different ways. And because we are all, what I call hyper Americanized, our experiences are slightly different, right? We've got these silos, one kind of which I think lives at home, and then one which lives outside of the home, and how we interact. And depending on how, I guess you've related to that culture that you've kind of grown up in. For me, it was really expressed in a wildly different way. And my father had really big dreams and aspirations of me becoming something great or good or a champion in some capacity. And it first started in academics, and it kind of led towards this path of sport because I just had so much energy, and I fell in love with sports in general, mainly because it just helped me control my ADHD. And I think that my dad saw that I had this natural propensity to excel in sport, and so that accelerates this story to I think talk about how those kind of impacts of how I grew up in sport kind of shaping and honing the direction of my life really came from my dad, and him kind of constantly being that tiger father and pushing me towards these really high aspirational goals of really becoming the maximum version of myself that I could be. And then, you kind of couple that with the fact that he told me that I could truly be anything, is very powerful, right? It was amazing. And also the expectation level was also very, very, very high. And I think, growing up in this like quasi, Japanese American household, my dad was not obsessed with perfection, but just believed that we should always be striving for growth in everything that we do. And that really reflected itself in the work ethic that he, I think, instilled within me, which is really powerful, and I'm grateful for. But also later on in my life, I guess, waking up your son at like, 3:30, 4 in the morning to go off and practice like in an empty school parking lot when you're 11, 12 years old. I don't know if that's the most healthy thing psychologically for a kid, but it taught me a lot. And so, I had this identity that was really, kind of married to the world of the Olympic path. And, I had lived that for 15 years straight. I cared about nothing else. Nothing else was important in my life. I truly loved the world of the Olympics and that path. And then, the day that I decided to retire from the sport, which was 11 years ago, kind of around this time, that what I call this great divorce occurs, in which that one thing that you love and you felt that you were externally signaled and shown that you were strong and you were great, and it's the only thing that you care about, it kind of snap your fingers and it tells you that you should go in a different direction. And that divorce actually happened. So that was like a really, I think, viscerally and internally psychologically challenging thing that I had known about even before I had retired. I had heard stories from other Olympic athletes and other professional athletes who were friends of mine, but until you feel it, you're seeing the world at this lens through your own eyes and ears, and no one else can really feel your pain because they're not inside your own head. And so I just was very confused in terms of like, what else am I good at, right?
Yeah.
Even in these,
Yeah.
even in these introductions, right? Like when someone asks you, like, tell us about yourself. Oh, I'm an 8-time Olympic medalist, right? But that's like one small section of your life of who you are. Maybe something that you love to do. And so grappling with that was a challenge.
Absolutely. And we're going to dive into more around like people associating their identity with their work. And but before we kind of dive into that, Wes, I know that your parents were really supportive of your love for arts and your love for design.
Yeah, supportive. Supportive in the way that they didn't object as much as traditional Chinese parents would. That they were supportive in that way. I would say that when you ask what I wanted to be when I grow up, I think the story goes. My parents told me that when they used to ask me that, I said I want to be a dragonfly. It's like, you ask a kid that, and they have, there is no bounds to what they think, and I guess that I've always been someone that I guess wants to be creative and wants to imagine things and translate those things from the mind to physical reality. But my parents were supportive in the fact that they admitted that they came to the U.S. so that my brother and I could have a better life, and they were really, they were great parents in the fact that they didn't pressure us to do things just because it seemed what everyone else was doing or what we needed. They really let us explore. But as we explored, there was a pressure to, mainly from my dad, to be the best. Kind of what Apollo was saying. It's like, yeah, you can choose what you want to do, but make sure you stand out and make sure you're the best at it. And because there was certain freedom in what we chose to do, the pressure came on how we did it, and the quality of work. So they were supportive, but it wasn't to say that it was super relaxed and I could do anything I wanted. If anything, them being relaxed, put the pressure on myself, and I think a lot of people can relate to that now. We don't get this ongoing nag from our parents. It's actually like a few things they say that stick with us, and we internalize that. And the funny thing is, it does really create some of the best products and performances. When we have that work ethic and when we try that hard, but at what cost, right? So I think finding that balance has always been something that I'm still dealing with. But yeah, my parents have been supportive, and now that they see how hard we're trying, and we're able to eat and live a good life, they just want us to be healthy. And
yeah, they know that you're not going hungry. I think that's like a big win for them.
A big tip is when you talk to your parents, call them when you're like having a meal, because it shows that like you're taking care of yourself. And they won't ask like, oh, are you eating okay? It's like it shows more.
That's a good tip. I'll try that next time. When we talk about, I think, just putting pressure on ourselves in order to succeed, right? Like, I recall a story that Emily told about how, like, similar to Apollo, you went into weightlifting in order to sort of like divert your attention from your day job. Do you want to share a little bit about that?
Yeah, I mean, I think everything Apollo and Wesley said was very familiar to me. And I think growing up, my parents, and I feel like maybe like the Asian American society I knew, everyone identified themselves with their jobs, right? Your identity was either your job or your best accomplishment, like whatever like you thought was more impressive to tell people. So, and I was an engineer in Silicon Valley, so I think there's a lot of that going on there too. So when I was an engineer, I was building my career. I didn't really feel like I was making the progress that my parents or their voice in my head told me that I should be making, right? And I think part of that was really frustrating. So a lot of the anxiety I felt, or the stress, or the pressure, I took out on in lifting, and then going to the gym helped me really get away from the stress and the pressure of needing to cultivate this identity as this of being a super successful person in tech. But on the flip side, then I ended up thinking, like, my parents' voice in my head well, I'm going to be a power lifter. I have to give it all I got, and I got to be good, because I can't identify as a power lifter unless I'm good and unless I'm, really, really succeeding in this. And what first started off as like a break from this tech identity kind of took on a new identity of its own. So in the beginning, it was a break from being a tech employee, but I think in a lot of ways it became very unhealthy too, because I still had this Asian diaspora mindset of, well, if I do it, I have to be really good at it, and then if I'm not good at it, then I can't I can't proclaim that I'm a power lifter.
Or it's like, who am I, right? Like, if
Right,
I'm not good at this, if I'm not this, and if I'm not that, then who am I,
right.
right?
And so that became dangerous thinking. And eventually, I lost the world records. Somebody broke them, and eventually, I I wasn't like I was not at the same prestigious job that I had been prior. So I thought, well, who am I now? But I think that's a silly question, because it's not like I changed overnight because the world records got broken by somebody else or because I quit a job, right? I'm still that same person. But I think this concept of you identify with a job as a job or with an accomplishment creates this type of pressure that can never be like quenched. And sometimes it's good, and sometimes it's really unhealthy.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I mean, David, I recall that you have a similar sort of experience with multiple identities, being a pastor, but then also focusing on mental health.
Yeah, and honestly, like I resonate growing up. Nobody really asked me how I'm doing or how I'm feeling, right? It was a lot about like what I can perform. And so just being a little bit transparent here, even though I took on this journey of pastorate and being a Christian leader, I ended up picking up a lot of bad addictions and habits along the way to kind of cope and soothe with all of this internal pain that I was feeling. And I didn't know how to navigate that at all. And kind of the immigrant voice is what? Just suck it up, work hard, and push through. The religious voice actually says, just find God and God will take care of it all, right? And I did, and I was like, well, that's my lane, and so let me just figure that out. And I realized that even in that space, if it's not a holistic understanding, right, and understanding that it was approached for me very one dimensionally, which is either work hard or find it through spiritual journey. But for me, is what I realized in the process is that no, you have a body, you have a mind, you have a soul, and there's all things going on. And so to approach it from more of a holistic path, and that's actually how I got involved in mental health and involved in therapy. And you say, well, pastor getting therapy, like, does that even make sense? Yeah, it does. I needed a lot of help, and just kind of embracing it from multiple angles have really helped me a lot in my journey.
Yeah. And you have this gripping story about kids at your church.
Yeah, so my in my former church, which I'm not going to name, and I worked a lot with youth and in Silicon Valley with Asian youth that I'm working with. And what I would and one of the student actually had a plan to kill about 15 of her classmates at the school, and had this all mapped out where she would purchase the gun and so forth. And so for us, we would try to bring to these to her parents and just trying to address it. And what she would tell is that she would only address it from almost a spiritual lens. And it was really frustrating and confusing for us to really tackle that, because we wanted for her to understand that it's more than that. There's a lot more issues going on, and but in Asian community, in the places that I work with, the the frustration of kind of one-dimensional understanding of what healing and wholeness look like has allowed me to kind of engage with other spheres so that I could work with families in more of that holistic approach.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. As opposed to just like one sort of lens. And like,
Yeah.
Gabe, like I don't know if you've like kind of encountered something similar where you feel like there's multiple identities that you have to fulfill, or you've seen people since you've been studying psychology that feel like they have multiple identities, but like they're so attached to like, I guess like trying to succeed. And like, I live in New York City, right? Where the culture here is just like, instead of asking the first person you meet, like, hey, how's it going? What's going on? Like the first thing you ask like a stranger is like, oh, what do you do? Like, what are you? Like, what do you do? Right. And that just speaks so much to like how people treat each other in terms of identifying them with like their profession versus who they actually are as a human.
Right. Yeah. And I think I find that a lot in the work I've done as a college therapist too. This identity, this idea about identity saliency. Like I think what a lot of people on the panel are talking about are these individual identities that they hold, and how just kind of being in one identity or just kind of living in one identity for a certain period of time can cause stress of like it fusing with all of you. And I think what happens, at least in my own studies, is realizing that it becomes an intersection of identities, of being able to pull from different parts of yourself. Like for me, for example, being able to pull my identity as a psychologist, my identity as a Filipino man, and also other identities that aren't at work. Like I love anime, I love playing video games, and how they all integrate together. And that integration being kind of a better way of kind of identifying who you are and expressing yourself genuinely. Because I think, Lucia, what you were saying of like how we identify, but what we do, that is so encompassing of kind of like an Asian American mentality of what are you producing? How well are you producing it? And I think that can be really hard on ourselves. I think I'll say this is the last thing. Like both my parents like didn't put any pressures on me, and yet throughout most of my grad school education, I've often had to compare myself to others. That's so crazy. It's like that wasn't something I grew up with, but I still felt. And I think that speaks to kind of the intensity of the comparing, of always having to produce content, of always having to produce. It can be, a lot.
The compare and despair sort of trap, right? And I know that Wesley, you've talked a lot about that. I mean, being in a field where you're just constantly, you have to churn out content and have to put out new things in order to just stay relevant, and like comparing yourself to the younger generation that's like coming out on TikTok or like any of the new other social media channels.
Yes.
It's not really a question.
Yeah.
It's more of like, hey.
You reminded me. You reminded me everything that gives me anxiety.
Sorry.
No, it's true. It's funny because it's not something we. When Wong Fu Production started, it was 3 friends that liked to make videos for fun when everyone else was either playing video games or going out. We were some guys with some cameras, and we wanted to tell some stories. We didn't sign up to enter the popularity contest that social media has become and what YouTube is now. Not to say that there isn't great parts, but there comes parts of the territory that we weren't ready for. And what those effects would be on ourselves. But yeah, comparison, I'm not gonna lie. Like I preach, people to not compare, and instead of one being better or worse than the other, it's different. Like I think that is the most that's the one lesson that I can really follow through with these days. Like I know someone's better at something than me. Like I know that I'm not as good as that person or as that person, but I can do it differently. And I think that is very empowering. So it's the way you tell the story is going to be 100% unique to you. And I think that's what we do at Wong Fu Productions. We know that every emotional drama is out there, but the way we're doing it and the elements that we're incorporating are unique to us and our experiences. And I think that's what we want to inspire others with too.
Yeah. Apollo, going to the Olympics where you literally are measuring everything possible to compare yourself with your competitors and with the other people, like, what are your thoughts around like being in the Olympics, measuring yourself against the competition, and then coming out of the Olympics, and then now it's kind of like what you described earlier as like this moment where you're like you've become detached from the constant like competition, and like now you're kind of in this like big pool of people with so many different paths to go. Like I'm just kind of curious, like what was going on in your mind at that point, and like how you've been thinking about it.
Well, I don't. I think the competition and the comparison and analysis that exists across. I mean, that's just how you do sport, right? Without it, there's no sport. And I don't think it's really that much different when you leave the world of athletic performance. And you're always gauging and measuring your metrics. And yes, the underlying kind of thought process is like the race is against myself. And, Emily can talk about, like I can only, I want to set the bar as high as I can to be the maximum version of myself in any capacity. And then in business, like how do I optimize my life and routine so I could be the best version of myself?
Right.
But look, the reality is we live in a world where comparison is around us. You can't escape it. It's not something you can suppress because it's going to show up in many different areas of your life. And I think it's a natural human physiological phenomena to respond to those things and either get motivated, inspired, angry, sad, jealous, envious. Like those are natural things that we have, right? We always are striving for something. And they always say that, you want what always retreats from you the most in some capacity, right? That's what makes goal-oriented people go after these things obsessively. And so I think that, I still have the comparison issues. I was comparing myself to someone this morning and I was thinking in my head psychologically, it's like, man, like, so-and-so has done this and this, that, yeah, so fat. Like, why don't I do something like that? Or how can I do something like that? And I don't think we ever escape it. I think we learn to identify when we're starting to do those types of things slightly differently, and then at least be able to take the mirror and say, like, is this the most healthy way of living my life? And it's oftentimes you can say, like, I know what I'm doing, but how do you react and respond to it in a way that actually will help you, I think, carve your path in a different way. I mean, those who are Buddhists or those who are religious or spiritual, they can say, like, if you want true happiness and joy, you remove the things that you want out of your life. Now that's amazing, but I'm not going to go live in Venice, like, in a tent and not have wants and desires and needs in my life, or go be a monk in a certain area. Like, I think we live in a modern society where you're always going to be tugging back and forth. And the way that I have dealt with that on a personal level is realizing that the path that I have is unique to my own experiences. And it's my choice in terms of how I consume, how I compare, and how do I put these things in perspective? Because at the end of the day, if you interview people all over the age of 80, they're not comparing their lives to anyone. And I think that they will tell you first and foremost, like, your life will go by so fast, and all of your goals and dreams and aspirations, like those things are great because that's what makes you on fire as a person, but don't let them consume you. And I think part of that consumption internally is, how do you balance your life between, I want to tackle my goals, I want to be ferocious, I want to go get after it, and also being present and being able to say to yourself and look in the mirror that you accept that who that person is amidst all the flaws. And when you look in the mirror, there's no one else there, right? It's just you and yourself. And that's sometimes in our society, I feel like even more so today, is perhaps the most challenging and difficult thing to do because there's no comparison and you're just looking at yourself. And so I speak to a lot of organizations and companies, and we're trying to figure out ways in which we can help increase the bottom line of that typical organization and company. And I say, like, look, I don't need to know about your business. If you have human beings working, then you're dealing with a whole complexity issue that we can go on for weeks and weeks and talk about. And so I want you to start working on yourself. And that only starts is when you can accept who that person is in the mirror, and then begin this process of saying, what can I do to help transform into that version who I'd like to be? And a part of that is eliminating some of that consumption that we are given every single day of comparison. And it's very hard to do, very hard to do.
Yeah, Apollo, I think you hit on a really important point, which is self-reflection, mindfulness, understanding yourself, right? And I think that's really the crux of this panel. It's the crux of today's conference. It's about recognizing who you are and learning to really see yourself for who you are, right? And taking that, being objective about yourself, and then moving that forward. So in that sort of vein, like, I want to ask you guys, when was the moment when you guys realized that you needed to do some self-reflecting, or that you needed to focus on your mental health in order to move forward? Emily, you want to take this one?
Sure. Yeah. I think for me, I had this like big windfall where I had this like what was considered a very fancy, prestigious job. I was a manager at Google, and then I had these world records, and I was on the Titan Games. And around the same time, I quit the Google job because I just felt like it didn't make me happy. Did not win the Titan Games. Spoiler alert. And then I think around the same time, somebody else, little by little, other people broke my records. So I went from like having like all these like really nice accolades to just being like a regular person. And I remember thinking like, oh man, I don't have like any of these like fancy qualifiers anymore. Like, who am I? And every time I would say that out loud, my friends would say like, oh, well, what do you mean? That's ridiculous. Like you are still the exact same person. Nothing has changed, right? Like, do you really think anyone's going to look at you different or think of you different or remember you differently? Especially like these things actually did happen. It's not like these things didn't happen. Your life is not a lie anymore. And so I think that I realized that the idea of qualifiers as an identity is more detrimental than helpful, right? Yeah, it's great to have goals. It's great to achieve them, but just achieving the goals does not make you who you are. It's like the personality that you had that got you to the goals. Obviously, is probably more your identity than the actual milestone that you hit. And then when unfortunately, just the way a lot of societies are, inclusive of Asian society, inclusive of Silicon Valley, they don't think about, who is the person that got you to that milestone. They just think about that milestone. So, I think it was around that time I thought, well, I have to just look at this differently. I can't think I'm not me just because these past events are now in the past, right? I have to understand that I am still this person. It's just, I'm this person who did these things, and these things were in the past now instead of the present.
Yeah. Wesley, you have your name associated to a brand. And, when people think of you, they think of that brand. And so kind of curious about how you view that as well. And like, if there were moments when you were like, wait, I'm also much more than just this brand.
Yes. Well, I always wonder that question too. Like how much, people used to address me, Phil, or Ted as, oh, hey, Wong Fu, and that makes sense. That makes sense. It's like the team name, right? But I do wonder sometimes, like how much of my own how much of my individual identity do people know and think of? But then that's kind of up to me too, like how much of it I put out there for people to know, versus just my Wong Fu work. But just to back up, you said what's a moment where we had to like self-reflect? Yeah, and I'll share something that I shared with you guys earlier, but with the audience or the viewers now. Like maybe 3 years ago now, I actually took like a step away from Wong Fu, not like in a permanent, or not in like a formal way, but it was just I had been doing Wong Fu was the only job I had ever, minus like a college job. I never interviewed for anything. We were just three friends that created this thing, right? And that took a toll. We lived together for more than 5 years. We went to the same office for 5 years. We had the same social group for like this was something none of us expected, and like the strain it took on our relationships was really showing. And I lost a lot of creative confidence when I like almost the machine was bigger than me. And a lot of that was because we had to make things kind of by the YouTube's rules, or like if you want to be successful or grow on YouTube, things were coming into play that we had to go along with. Kind of the popularity contest thing that we were talking about. But in doing that, I think I definitely lost creative confidence and also just motivation. And I started looking back. I was like, why is this happening to me? And I started comparing myself to my older work, which did very well. Like they'd say the classic Wong Fu stuff that people still reference. Like I'll make stuff last month that people won't know about, but they'll talk about that other thing, which is great. I love that. I actually love that. But it made me wonder, like, why can't I be that guy again? And that was really hard. So I actually did take a break to reflect. So it happens to everyone. There's no point to that story except I came back with a better understanding of what I liked doing and how I could do it in a way that would be enjoyable and healthy. And that wouldn't have happened if I didn't remove myself. And I know it sounds almost severe and very negative, but it's those moments that you really have to give yourself to learn those things, or else there's too much noise. And I encourage anyone that's in a hard place to let them give themselves that time to do that.
Yeah, absolutely.
And I totally forgot your actual question.
No, you answered my question.
Wesley, I resonate with that. I was on a forced break, but I'm a firm believer in breaks and having these pauses or transitions in life for you to take them and really take a look. For me, about 3 years ago, my family, my wife and two girls, 3 and 1 at that time, we got into a pretty severe car accident. Somebody rear-ended us in a freeway going 70 miles per hour. I thought I lost my children. And when I turned back, the car seats weren't where it was supposed to be. And as a father, that's like literally the worst nightmare. And that took about a year of recovery for our family. I had a brain injury, couldn't see for about a year. But during that time, that break, what was more frustrating, I'm being honest, what was more frustrating was that I was more pissed that I couldn't work than driving my family to their treatments. And that was the realization that, oh, wow, like something I'm doing the very thing that I'm fighting against about the Asian American culture, which is that you work for just your own success and fame, right? And I've been trying to preach against that, but I've been also living in that culture. And so that year break was really needed for my family to reconsider and reposition ourselves. And what does it look like to actually put relationships first? And so definitely didn't want that and didn't expect it and didn't force it, but it was really helpful for my mental health. And so yeah, I just want to say I resonate with you, man.
Thank you for sharing that, David.
Yeah, I was wondering if I could also kind of bump in too, because I think a lot of what's been shared is so I think relevant to everyone in this panel. But so I don't really have a brand or anything, but when I think about the brand or like just who I am, is just of being like a good worker, or very what's the word? Just like consistently working and producing, like in school. And I think to kind of answer your question that you initially posed, I think when I realized that I needed to take a break for mental health was when I realized like I was just not happy with what I was producing anymore. When the projects I was involved with, whether it be research meetings or anything, wasn't bringing me the same joy that it was. I think in those moments I felt really and truly burnt out, right? And feeling like, I can't offer anymore. And something, I've been in therapy a lot of different times, and I'd like to destigmatize mental illness. I think it's important to talk about therapy, and at least in this specific instance I'm thinking of, I went into therapy because I just really didn't have as much joy in the stuff that I was doing. And something I really took away from that experience is just kind of the healing power of like saying no. I think there's been something I feel like I share with a lot of people on the panels of like always consistently producing and going for more and working towards a goal and saying, yes, I'll do that. Yes, I'll do that. But also sacrificing our own mental health and our own sense of self. And it is so hard and I guess, maybe Asian American, just to not work and to maybe even say that no. And that's something I learned a lot in therapy, of just saying it's okay to take a break and it's okay to stop and take a breath. But it's so hard to do that. And it's a learning process. But if I could tell myself, like 10 years ago, like to say that it's okay to say no sometimes, it's okay to not say yes.
Yeah. It's definitely ingrained within the Asian culture to be very accommodating, or to be like say that. I think when a lot of times we think about saying no, it's like we're denying other people or we're denying ourselves. We're saying like, oh, I'm not capable of doing this, and so you don't want to say no because you're like, yes, I'm capable of doing this. I want to be able to do this. So in obviously, you guys have so much more to share in terms of your career and in terms of mental health, but we're closing in on the end of the panel. So I want to give enough time for questions from the audience. And a few of the questions that I think have the viewers are really interested in is like, all of you guys have various types of careers, right? Like the careers that you've pursued are both like, some are conventional, some are really unconventional. So one question that an audience member had is about transitioning careers. Like, how did you guys like transition to certain careers? Like Apollo, for example, like you were an Olympic athlete. Like, how did you then transition into like the world of business and entrepreneurship?
I think the transition stage is really challenging, right? Because we have got this kind of internal compass that tells us what we're good at and what we're not good at, and we often listen to that voice. And because we get so, I think, married to that one identity that was prior, we forget that. I use the analogy that we're like these diamonds that are pulled out of the ground that have all these facets and amazing parts of it, but they just haven't been polished yet. And it takes work and time and immersion and all those things to actually bring those other parts of your personality to life. And so one of the ways that really helped me not only, I guess, identify, but just really start to explore was this natural curiosity that I had in whatever career path that I was pursuing, whether it was a new business, whether it was trying to put a deal together, whether it was how do I improve the things that I really love to do. And, you often hear people talk about, well, just do things that you love. And I think that there's like some semblance of truth there, but the reality is not everyone has the luxury of doing the thing that they're really good at and that they really love. There may be other, modalities that you have to lean on in order to pursue those things, to just sustain your life, to get food and to have success in some capacity. So you can actually find joy in things in other parts of your life. And so I think, like the thing that really helped me was just understanding that, when someone asks me who you are, it's just one aspect of my personality. And there's all of these other unexplored chapters in my life that have yet to be written. And it's up to me to begin that adventure, to start that journey towards exploring and exploration. And along the path, I can expect to have some amazing success, and I can expect to have some chapters in my life that are going to be very dark and they're going to be very challenging and very difficult. I think once we start to accept that and understand that is the process of life, is that purpose or whatever it is that's bigger than you, and understanding it's not going to be this kind of Instagram story that looks like it's amazing, because it's not. And life is much more complex than that. That's when I really started to pursue things to help me transition, aside from the fundamentals of learning and being around people and surrounding myself in the environments, both digitally and in person, that will help cultivate a better understanding of what that career path wants from me and what I want from it. And so the one thing I always ask people is ask yourself these two questions. Number one, what do you want from life? Right? What do you want? What do you really want from it? And the second question is, what do you think life wants from you? Or what does world, right? And so for some people, this may be, your religion. What do I want in this life? And then what does God want from me? Or whatever it is, however you want to frame that. Those two questions, sometimes you get two wildly different answers, right? And I think it's important to constantly have these questions in your life often, to kind of recalibrate and refocus that true north, because of all the distractions that we live in, because of all the comparisons around the world, because of Instagram and all these social media assets of showing people what you should have, what you should look like, what you should be, how you should talk, how much money you should have. It's all bullshit, right? It's all fabricated through us, through human beings. And so you have to realign with what is most important to you.
Yes. Thank you for calling that out, Paulo. Absolutely. So I think there's so much in this world today that, Apollo, to your point of like what you should do. And I think, you guys have all talked about that little voice in your head that's like, I should be better. I should do all these things. I should be able to achieve these specific goals. And I think a lot of it is, put upon by our upbringing, or by the way that our parents have wanted us to do things. And I think to your point, Apollo, it's more about centering and asking yourself, like, what is it that I truly want? And then what is valuable that I could bring to the table, to the universe, right? Another question that some of the audience members have is around imposter syndrome. So it's for people who, want to be able to be either in a creative field or jump into something that they're not familiar with. And they want to be able to do it, but they feel like either they're not good enough or they're not like professionally trained. So, Emily, Wes, I don't know if either of you guys want to take that question.
I'm happy
Emily,
to
go ahead. I have an answer too, but
What's
no, please.
Okay, I mean, my short answer is going to be, if you don't feel like you have imposter syndrome, you're not trying hard enough.
It's Asian mom.
Right, exactly.
Yeah.
That just means they don't know what they don't know, right? If you're really truly committed to the process of like learning something and getting good, you're going to discover along the way that there are so many ways you can improve. And if you care, you're going to feel like self-conscious about it. So I think it's okay to have imposter syndrome. It sucks to have it, but I think anyone who's getting good at something will get it along the way to getting good, and that's fine. You just have to be okay with the discomfort and the anxiety of getting through it.
Great answer.
Yeah, I literally was experiencing that this whole morning for being on this panel. Like, I don't think I should be here. I feel like I live with it every day, and like I said earlier, the byproduct, kind of what Emily is saying, is it creates really good work if you have it. But the important thing is not to let it consume. And for someone that went to a biology school, UC San Diego, and studied not even film, like visual arts, and then was playing with video cameras, and is now, we've made a feature, we've done series, and now it still messes with my head sometimes, like the imposter syndrome of what are we doing. But we have film students that are asking to work with us now. I want to work at One for Productions. I went to USC Film School, and that's crazy to me. And I think it's important just to stay grounded. And like I said earlier, you're gonna do things differently, and that's the strength. Like, it's not about being better or worse. I mean, in the creative field, at least, with sports, and there is a very quantified, this was faster and this wasn't. But with like when you're creating something, you're doing it with your voice, and that's your strongest weapon. And I guess I want to say I had some reflection on how I used to talk about things. I used to tell people, don't just make a living, but live to make something. That was like my end nugget for my speeches, that we go off to university to say that. Now I think there should be like a footnote to that. It's because there's this glorification of making, always making content, and that's the end goal. And more content is better. I think now I'd say, don't just be a content creator, but be a content creator.
Ooh, I like that.
And the way to do that is to recognize that you can take breaks, and everything we've talked about. Like, it's not about the content all the time. It's about like your own well-being. And I think don't forget that. I think as someone that's been in it for over 15 years now, it's important to listen to yourself.
Thank you for sharing that. Yes. And that actually segues to a really nice ending for this panel with the last question. Someone asked, like, to your point, Wesley, like, how do you choose you, right? Like, how do you be a content creator? How do you choose you? How do you put yourself before others when you know that you feel like there's commitments that you have to uphold for other people? Maybe we can end.
Just real quick, I think it's about knowing that you're going to have more than one passion. Like, saying pursue your passion is a nice term, but you're going to have a lot of interest in life, and that's what makes us interesting. So don't just pursue one passion, explore all of them, and be okay if one fails. It's just going to lead to another one.
I like that. That should be on a t-shirt. Your interests make you interesting.
Did I say that?
You did. Gabe, you want to take a crack at how do you put you first?
I think I have like two different responses to that. One kind of like an overarching response, and one actually kind of like actually concrete. For me, I think to choose you, I think it's having a conversation in your head of this difference between should versus want. When you're thinking in your head, should I do this? I should be doing this. Is that really you saying that, or is it something that you really want? And that's something that's been really transformative for me, of really asking myself, is this something I want to do? Or is this something I think I should do? Now, when I think of the things, like it being self-care, right? Yeah, being able to take time for yourself, to take breaks, stuff that we've talked about. And for me, as someone who is still kind of going through those steps of trying to choose me, even in the field of psychology, I think I still feel a lot of like just stress overall. One thing that's actually been helpful for me is actually literally just scheduling time to choose me. I live and die by my Google Calendar, and I actually put time on my Google Calendar of like, this is what you're doing. You're resting. You're doing nothing. You're doing guilt-free resting, and that's actually been really hard to do. I think it's so much harder to schedule time for yourself and to choose you as opposed to produce and make. But I promise you, if you're able to kind of do that, that you can see lots of benefits on your own life and just less stress overall.
Absolutely. Yeah. David, do you have anything to share?
Yeah, growing up, I was taught that hobbies will not make money. And I remember my parents ripping up all of my Pokemon cards now that are worth hundreds and thousands of dollars, right?
Oh, no.
So they are worth money. and that's kind of upbringing where hobbies won't, do this or that. And I would say actually find hobbies that you enjoy, that really brings about deep self-care. I promote that. I mean, man, I don't want to go full religious here, but even our second greatest commandment here, like love your neighbor. We say that all the time in religious communities, like love everyone else. But the verse actually does not end with love your neighbor. It actually says love your neighbor as you love yourself. And even in our own tradition, it talks about loving yourself and caring for yourself, because the way you respect and honor yourself is the way you're going to respect and honor those around you. And if you have a low self-esteem and if you have a low understanding of who you are, the way you treat other humans, it will be the same. It's going to come out in that way. And so for me, yeah, treating yourself with respect and honor and enjoying the hobbies, that has helped a lot.
Yeah, thank you. Emily?
How do I choose me? I would say before the pandemic, I might have answered this differently, but I live in California where the lockdown was very, very strict and it was very long. So I think for a lot of us, especially the people who didn't have kids, we were forced to choose ourselves, right? Because pre-pandemic, if you worked in Silicon Valley, maybe you had a really busy job and all day was work, and then maybe you lived for the weekend or you lived for distractions. I know I did, right? So I'd work really hard and I'd live for the weekend or I'd live for that next vacation. And then suddenly during this pandemic, all distractions were gone. Like you had work and then you had maybe you could go outside, but there were no like weekends or going out or vacations. There were no positive distractions. So then what you're left with was, is this actually the life I want? Like without the positive distractions that made everything bearable, do I still like this? And if the answer is no, and sometimes it was no for me, it was, well, then like, what do I actually want and how will I change that? So, sometimes when there's no hiding, you have to ask yourself these hard questions.
Yeah, absolutely. Apollo, you want to take us home?
Sure. It's look. I think we just live in a world that is just, and I say this often, is just like kind of fraught with distractions, right? And I don't want to go off topic too much because obviously the question is important, but I think more importantly, people are tuning in because there's some semblance here of knowing about mental health. They know that it is becoming destigmatized, and Asian Americans traditionally have not been in the kind of open your heart up, wear your heart on your sleeve, show the vulnerability. That's just not been a part of our cultural experience, even through our parents, right? Like they came here typically with nothing and they really worked hard to get every single thing they had. And so they didn't have Pokemon cards. They didn't have these things. It was like literally do or die for them. And so their expectations for us is that we have to live that same way, which is fair of them to think that, right? Because that's all they know. And when we complain about things like, oh, I don't feel well, like my dad will be like, what? Like, what are you talking about? Like, you have no idea how good you got it. Yeah. And that's also true. I don't know how good I got it. but it's also my experience, and it's my pain, and it's real. And so whether I deserve it or not, I'm still feeling it. And so psychologically, that is a unique experience. And so I think you self-love and self-acceptance is really important, and it's really hard to do. It has to come from a very natural place that is authentic. And I think all of us, when we look in the mirror, there's things that we don't like what we see. And that's also normal and natural. The beautiful thing is, being present and being grateful for today. And then tomorrow you can begin to work on some of those things. And that doesn't happen until you really are able to say that, and I think David, that was such a great explanation of what you said was, like you have to take care of this first. And that's how you become the person that can achieve all the other things. And, I'm speaking from a place of experience where I had deep, deep insecurity and self-doubt and self-loathing and self-sabotaging my entire career. I dealt with those demons on an ongoing basis. And, the beautiful thing was once I started to identify, hey, Apollo, there's another path that doesn't involve you. It wasn't like self-harm, but self-sabotaging me. Like I would create obstacles in my way just to be able to try to overcome them, to kind of create this like amazing situation of result in the end. And what I realized is I was just hurting myself in that process. And so, when you start removing these obstacles from your life, and typically you place them there yourselves, your life is way more seamless. And it really starts, I think, with having that deeper conversation with oneself. And if you're not comfortable doing that, who is the person or the persons around you that you feel authentically that you can connect with? And we live in a world where, look, like I am willing to hear people. You are willing to hear people. Like we want to know how people are living their lives, especially during this pandemic. It's been really painful. Emily, I feel you. I'm in California. We haven't traveled in a year. Like my fiance, who's like so close to her grandma, and she feels like she has to get home, but then she has to quarantine for 21 days when she gets there. She doesn't know if her grandma's gonna be alive when she comes up out of quarantine. Like there's all these stresses and things that are happening in our lives, but you first got to take care of this, right? And so if you're living within the prison between your own two ears, only you have the key. Only you. You're only that one person. And so I urge every single person who's listening to this to know that, look, we live in a different era. And while you may never be able to explain it to your parents to where they understand it, there is a next generation of individuals like us who are talking about this openly, who are willing to talk about this. And it doesn't mean that you're weak or any of those things. Like your vulnerability can be an immense strength. And I think that, you owning those things in your authentic self shows that you are like a beautiful diamond willing to explore the other facets, and you're so much stronger than even perhaps you realize. So that's kind of my soapbox for the day. But I just want people to realize that self-love and acceptance is really important amongst all your flaws. Like that's normal. And the beautiful thing, like I said, is tomorrow you can begin to work on those things, but it first starts with what you see today.
Thank you, Apollo. Really well said. Also, that wraps up the panel. Hopefully, you guys can think about it and think about reflecting for yourself, like where you want to be in terms of your career, in terms of how you want to identify, and in terms of how you choose yourself every day.